Hi, this is Tim Gray, Senior Pastor of the City of Zion, and welcome to another episode of Phronesis. The last time we were together, I started talking about something I'd call the OXYMORON of SACRIFICE. I mentioned that there were 3 sacrifices that every believer is expected to perform. We then examined the first one, which is the sacrifice of praise. Of course, that is an oxymoron, because if it's praise, how come it's also a sacrifice? Because you were expected to offer praise even in the midst of your trials, your afflictions, your oppositions, and your afflictions. Saints, listen to this. Paul explaining to us about how praise works. We see in his own experience how he used praise as a weapon of warfare, and it broke all the chains that was upon him and Silas. It also opened all the prison doors. There is something about when you don't care about your circumstances, and in the midst of your trials, in the midst of your tribulation, you stay consistent in the release of your faith by releasing your praise. So of course, it is called the sacrifice of praise. But there is another sacrifice that I want to put the spotlight on that Paul also mentions. He calls it the sacrifice of giving. The sacrifice of giving. Look at Philippians 4 verse 18. It says here, "But I have all and abound. I am full, having received of Epaphroditus the things which were sent from you, an odor of a sweet smell, a sacrifice acceptable, well-pleasing to God." Here, Paul celebrates the Philippian church for their giving, but he calls it a sacrifice. These people gave to Paul for his upkeep. They also gave to him for the spread of the gospel. But in their case, he says that their giving was sacrificial. Sometimes giving is expected to be sacrificial. So these individuals, they gave even though it wasn't even convenient. They esteemed the gospel as important, and maybe for some of them even more so than their own personal needs. This we must learn to do. Let me mention about 3 things. 1, we must support the church with our giving, expecting the doors to stay open and be comfortable for you and your family, whereas we offer nothing to materially support the church, is illogical. Some will even argue that it is irresponsible. Number 2, we are asked to help the poor, particularly, but not limited to believers. Paul mentions that in Galatians chapter 6, verse 10. He also put a spotlight specifically on widows and orphans. It doesn't mean you shouldn't help others, but the Bible was quite specific about widows and orphans. They seem to have a special place in the heart of God. And so Paul indicates that we must be given to their support. Jesus, speaking about that, says when we actually do that and we give to them, that we are actually giving to him. That's a big deal. Number 3, we must also learn to support materially our pastors. We see this in Galatians chapter 6, verse 6. Paul also says that, speaking about this giving to pastors, he says, if they have blessed you spiritually, is it too much to ask that you bless them materially? You will find this in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 11. We are believers. We are doers of the word. We are givers. And if need be, we ought to also be sacrificial in our giving. Maybe I should close this by sharing with you quickly why we ought to give. I've spoken where we should give, but why we ought to give. Number 1, our giving reveals the state of our heart. I'm not making this up. In Luke 12:34, Jesus says, "For where your treasure is, that's where your heart will be also." Let me read this. It says, "So to know where your heart truly is, we see that by looking at where your treasure has gone." The value of every relationship is seen in the investment of resources. That is, whether it's time, it's money, it's skill. We see the value of the relationship by the investment in resources that is put in there. Same thing with our relationship with the Father. So we give because it reveals where our heart is. Number 2, giving is an act of faith. Paul, speaking about the Macedonian church, you should read about them in 2 Corinthians chapter 8, 2 Corinthians chapter 9. The Macedonian church, it says that they gave, and I love the way the King James put it. It says they gave even out of their deep poverty. How many of you will agree with me that that is sacrificial? They gave out of love, not because they were threatened, not because they were cajoled, not because they heard a very special sermon. They gave out of love. They also gave as an act of faith, indicating that they knew that in times of plenty or in times of lack, God is their supplier. A third reason why we give is simply because it is actually commanded. Jesus actually simply, even if we had no other reason, Jesus commanded us to give. In Luke 6:38, he says, "Give and it shall be given unto you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, shall men give to your bosom." There, Jesus commanded that we ought to give. Let us be known for our generosity. Do not give because you heard a very inspirational sermon and all of a sudden you feel so oppressed and so condemned that you are going to give what you did not plan on giving. That is irresponsible. I don't just blame the preacher, I blame you too. You should read the word. The Bible talks about how we give that which we have prepared in our hearts to give. Our maturity should be seen in the fact that whether there was a good sermon or a bad sermon, whether there is plenty or there is lack, we understand that we give because it is commanded. So circumstances should not inform our giving, should not inform our praying, should not inform our service to God. We should be consistent because we know it is the right thing to do. There is the place for the sacrifice of giving. Sometimes, as I close this, understand that it will be a sacrifice like the Macedonian church, or like the widow that Jesus said came and gave her last money. She gave, we call her the widow and her mite. But irrespective of that, we need to appreciate the fact that consistency is the hallmark of the disciple. Again, when I say consistency, I'm talking about total life consistency. You are consistent in your devotional disciplines, which includes being a giver. My prayer for you and myself is that we as believers will be known as generous. It is a sad day when people know you in your community and you are a child of God, but you are known as that stingy individual. No, that is not our testimony. We are givers. We help the needy. We support the kingdom of God because he has given us his nature, and his nature is a giving one. I'm out of time. This has been Tim Grage, Senior Pastor of the City of Zion on Phronesis. Catch you again soon. Bye for now.